Eagles 34-29 over the Giants. 12-2, first round bye. If they win Monday night, which is Christmas night, ho, 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 you'll get a great Christmas present. 2 home games, PT, in the NFL playoffs. Essential. But, John, after watching that defense yesterday, will 2 home games be enough?
Well, you got to win one home game to get the second home game. And the Eagles might clinch before Monday night, so that's a possibility if the Vikings lose to the Packers on Saturday. But they have some things to correct, there's no question. And defensively, you would think is not at the top of the list because of the uncertainty surrounding the quarterback and all that. But bottom line is they haven't played well recently, and there's no getting around it. And you get the feeling there's starting to be some excuses when you talk about road trips and body clock games in the opposite direction, because in a weird way the Eagles were coming back from the West Coast. They just didn't play well against a bad football team. And I'm sure that's kind of going to be Jim Schwartz's take, because he's not big on excuses.
Is it a fair excuse to say, look, we were out west, we played 2 high-level games that had a lot of meaning to them, and then we come back home and we're playing against a team that's 2-11? I mean, we talked a little bit about overlooking this team. In fact, it was one of my keys yesterday. Don't overlook this team after you play 2 high-profile games. Human nature kicks in. We're playing a team that's 2-11. It's the 3rd week in a row. Is it fair or not fair?
Well, we've talked a lot about those games this year, let down human nature games, and for the most part the Eagles have been able to avoid that trap, and they won the game. I mean, so you have to give them credit for that, but yeah, I always talk about the human nature of looking at a 2-11 team and sort of taking it for granted, and not only that, but you don't have all the benching of the quarterback, the firing of the coach, the firing of the general manager, Odell Beckham not being there. So there's a lot of reasons not to take that team very seriously. But when you see them giving up 500 yards of total offense, 400 through the air, and as I said, it's not OBJ out there. It's Tavares King and players like that. So it was a tough day for the defense, but you hope it's a hiccup, and it is just the fact that they overlooked the team. But I think now you have to start questioning maybe that secondary is starting to leak oil, because if you go all the way back to training camp in week 1, we're concerned about that secondary. And maybe it's starting to finally show up.
Yeah, you wrote about it that the secondary was the main culprit. You had Mills, Darby. They didn't have Rasul Douglas active yesterday. Robinson gets a concussion. But what was it about them that was struggling in that secondary? Is it the coverage, the tackling? I mean, when you say that they were the culprit, what did they not do very well yesterday?
All the above.
Yeah, I think it's all of the above. I think Pete's right. I mean, the tackling wasn't good. It didn't seem they were prepared for the Giants' tempo early, which is strange because it's not like that's new. They do that a lot. And as I wrote on 973ESPN.com, that the fact that they didn't handle those quick slants at all, and generally they've been really good with that throughout the season. And they were just giving out huge separation. And that gave the Giants the ability to get yards after catch. It was just a strange performance. And from that standpoint, you kind of do lean towards the fact that maybe it was the anomaly and it's not the trend, because that's the first time really that they've played that poorly. Now, they've had issues and hurdles along the way, but when it all comes together like that and you don't cover and you get beat on double moves and you don't tackle, maybe it is a good thing in a weird way, because you say that's probably not going to continue.
John, since you mentioned double moves, Ronald Darby is the guy you highlighted in your 10 things to know. I've seen some discussion and talk and narrative out there that maybe Ronald Darby looks a little lost out there, that he's having perhaps a crisis of confidence. What are you seeing out of Ronald Darby right now?
Yeah, I mean, he didn't play well. He was in that category, probably the main culprit, because he got beat so many times on double moves. He also, though, got the big play that really put Philadelphia back on track when they were down 27, and gave them the short field to go in and score. That kind of changed the momentum of the game. So it wasn't all bad. He's still got ability. We know that. But he's definitely got to clean it up, because people are going to watch that film and say, this guy's susceptible to double moves. And clearly, everyone can see that now. So I don't think it's the last time Ronald Darby's going to be seeing that this season.
You put any stock into the fact that, I mean, they only had one sack in the game, but then again, you've got a system where Eli 1, 2, 3 throw, right? I mean, they try to get the ball out quickly. They did that again. You're not expecting to get a lot of sacks. Could that also be a reason that the secondary struggled? It got exposed because the front four aren't able to get the quarterback down to the ground.
Not necessarily. I don't think it was the best game the front four has played by any stretch of the imagination. And there were times when they didn't get home, the few times when the Giants did, and Eli held on to the football a little bit longer. But you're right. You never look at sacks when you play the Giants. Never, ever, ever, because he's going to get rid of the football. So to me, that's not important. What's important is getting him off his spots and hurrying him up even more. And the Eagles really didn't do that. And from that standpoint, it wasn't their best game. But, you know, he's always going to throw 3 or 4 a game that you have a chance to make plays on. I don't think the Eagles took full advantage of that. The Nigel Bradham pass interception should have ended the game. Ronald got one. There were a couple other ones they could have picked off and didn't. So it's more of sort of not finishing those particular plays.
When we did studs and duds, John, I gave my number one stud to the special teams a week after they had gotten their own punt blocked against the Rams. They came out and blocked 3 kicks in the game, and I thought it was nice that you gave kudos to Brian Brayman, too, for specifically spotting out what he did on the punt block.
Yeah, he's a great special teams player, and that was the one thing I think through sort of the Chip Kelly regime and when Dave Fitt got here, I thought the Eagles were better and ahead of the curve of most NFL teams, because they specifically sort of went out and got good special teams players. Everybody else seems to, you know, put your backup linebacker on there, put your backup safety corner, what have you, and hope their athleticism translates into good special teams play. It doesn't always work like that. And the Eagles have always been really, really good about locating players that are good at special teams. It starts with Chris Maragos and Brian Brayman, always has. Maragos is one of those season-ending injuries nobody talks about. We always talk, obviously, you talk about Carson Wentz and Jason Peters and Jordan Hicks and Darren Sproles. You should put Maragos in that category. That's how important he is on special teams. They haven't been the same since he went down. That's why they brought Brayman back and mentioned to bring energy to the unit. And, hey, looks real good early. I mean, it's tough to plot kicks in this league, and they get 3 in one game.
Hey, John, they talked. There was a lot of talk this week about were they going to change the offense, were they going to do anything. Any evidence that they did anything different yesterday, or did they run essentially the same offense?
No, they essentially ran the same offense, and I think that was important to Doug, and he mentioned it after the game. And I asked him the question. I said, look, you can say all you want, nothing changes when the MVP of this league goes down. I don't know if anybody believes you. And he had to show not only to the fans and media, and forget that, he had to show it to his own locker room. And that's what I think he did. And to his credit, he didn't scale anything back from an offensive standpoint. And you get 4 touchdowns. I mean, you can't say enough about that team's offense. And by the way, they left a lot on the field. And you think about it, they got 4 touchdowns from Carson Wentz last week. They get 4 touchdowns from Nick Foles this week. That doesn't happen often in this league. And they're able to do it with 2 different quarterbacks. And as I said, it really –
not to mention, John, they scored 34 with the backup left tackle and the third left guard.
Yeah, and the defense, we took shots at them. Also give them credit, as I said, for the Darby play. They got a short field, and also the special teams. Pete mentioned the block punt, which was a short field. So that contributed as well. But, hey, 4 touchdowns is 4 touchdowns, as I said. That's pretty good.
Absolutely. One of the things moving forward here, that defense, obviously had its struggles, but they struggled the week before against the Rams. They struggled the week before that against Seattle. You start to wonder, as in years past. Now, I know in the Kelly years it was, they were always on the field too much because they had some times in the Kelly years where for like 10 weeks you'd be like, maybe I do believe in this defense, and then boom, they'd come absolutely crashing down. You just hope that that's not what's going on with this defense, because a lot of us kept saying, well, this defense is playing over their head. So do you think that we're seeing a team that played over their head, just had a bad couple of weeks, or what?
Well, I mean, I'll say this. I think it's fairer to say, look, you're on the road against 2 really good teams. One, a very, very explosive offense with the Rams. The other, maybe not as consistent, but they have Russell Wilson, so the difficulties there. So to me, I could overlook those performances and say, at least they came back and played really well in the fourth quarter against the Rams. This one's tougher. I can't. I mean, that's a bad football team. And they don't do anything well. They don't throw the ball well. They don't run the ball well. And you look up after 60 minutes of football, and they got a 504 yards, I think was the final tally. It's tough to spin that in a positive direction. So you have to start asking questions. I think ultimately the front 4 is going to be fine. I don't think that was their best performance, as I said, but there's too much talent there. But now you start to ask some questions about the back end, and I think that's legitimate.
A lot of questions today regarding what will the plan be if they clinch on Christmas night, if that game is kind of wrapped up. Doug kind of said he had a plan. He's begun thinking about it, but didn't really reveal anything. Do you think – because he did say later on that in a perfect world kind of that Nate Sudfeld, he'd like to get some playing time.
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought Week 17 because I think the Eagles will ultimately clinch. It depends. Like I said, you got to go status quo during the week because you have to wait till Saturday night to see what happens with the Vikings and Packers. And ultimately, they could already clinch if Green Bay wins. They don't even have to play anybody against the Raiders. So, but I think you need Nick Foles. The one thing I will criticize him for in the Giants, you saw a number of times sort of double clutching. And I think that relates to the fact he hasn't played a lot. And you just got to get more comfortable out there. So I think there's something to he needs to play that full football game. And I think when you get to Week 17, I think you've clinched, and then you sort of treat it like the Week 3 preseason game. Maybe give him a quarter and a half, and then go to Nate Sudfeld. Ultimately, I think that's what they're going to do.
John, last year the Eagles were 1-7 on the road. This year they're 6-2, and I know Doug was asked today about why he thinks they're having more success on the road. Why do you think they're having more success on the road?
Well, I'll tell you, it helps when you travel as well as they do. and you're good. I mean, when we always talk home versus road, first of all, you got to be a good football team, or you don't have a home field advantage. You don't win on the road. So that's number one, and they're obviously a good football team. But Eli admitted, look, they had a chance to win that football game. Granted, it was 4th and goal, I think, at the 6-yard line. They got a false start because the Eagles fans there were so loud. Bobby Hart jumped. And we've talked about their ability to take over stadiums, especially in Los Angeles with the Chargers and the Rams. So you got to give the Eagles fans a lot of credit. There's certain games, Seattle being a notable example, because they would have been there if they could get in the stadium. And typically you can't get into MetLife Stadium, but because of the disastrous year the Giants have had, people looking to get rid of their tickets, and the Eagles fans picked them up, and they were extraordinarily loud. So I think that helps. But, I think when we talk about the Eagles getting to 11-2, you start the first bullet point of everything is the MVP, and that's Carson Wentz.
By the way, earlier in the show, Bobby Hart was referred to as Bret Hart.
That was by me.
Which would be...
It just said B. Hart, and I went with the first name that came out of my mouth, and it happened to be Brett.
Yeah, so what would be your top...
And by the way, Pete's the only non-wrestling guy on this conversation.
Right, so what would be your top Bret the Hitman Hart moment? The Montreal screw job or Stone Cold Steve Austin passing out with blood pouring down his face at WrestleMania 13?
That's tremendous. And don't forget the Iron Man match with Shawn Michaels at, I believe, WrestleMania 12.
That's right. You also have the King of the Ring in 2000, what was that, 93?
But I would think the best match I've ever seen in my life is what you just mentioned, Mike, WrestleMania 13. Bret Hart, Steve Austin, sort of the double turn. Which is very rare to do in wrestling and very difficult to pull off.
Yes, the double turn with Stone Cold pouring blood down his face.
Exactly.
All right. Catch or not a catch?
Well, there's a bigger explanation. By the NFL's rules, it's not a catch.
Right.
It's the right call.
Isn't that the problem, though, that's not a catch?
The rule is bad, yes. But I've always said, people, to win an argument, you have to be under the right premise. And people are upset about the officials, the replay officials. That's not who you should be upset about. You should be upset at the legislation, which is the rule itself. They're only doing what they're told to do. So don't get angry at the officials. Get angry at the league and say, you've got to change this rule. It's stupid.
I would agree. Well, here's the thing. Okay, the guy catches the ball. That's obvious. It's clear and present right in front of your face. He caught the ball. His knee is now touching the ground. His one knee now equals 2 feet. He has essentially caught the ball, but no one has touched him.
Exactly.
So he's, because no one's touched him, you now have the opportunity to not catch the ball. That doesn't make any sense. So he essentially fumbled the ball because he caught it. His knee was down. He made a football move, and him going down is now a fumble. So he essentially fumbled it and recovered it.
Well, and that's the problem with the league, and I've said for a lot of times, the over legislation and the casual fan can't understand it. And sometimes I question myself for understanding it, and I because it's so convoluted. If he's a runner, yes, it's a fumble. But because he's a receiver, the knee down doesn't matter. None of that matters until he completes the entire catch.
But for every other position, it matters, except for the wideout. That's what makes
right, because he's considered going to ground. He's considered going to ground.
Like if a running back, if they handed the ball off.
A running back does the same thing. It's a fumble. If nobody touches him,
right,
and a running back does the same thing, it's a fumble. A receiver, none of that matters until he completes the catch, goes to the ground, and does all the histrionics. And we talk about it. The absurdity, think about just the absurdity of a running back sticking the tip of the football into the goal line, breaking the plane. Play's over. Play is completely over. And think about what a receiver has to do sometimes in the end zone and make these acrobatic catches, and sometimes they're phenomenal. And you could get 3 steps inbounds, but you're tumbling out, and if you hit the ground and the ball just comes out at the very end, it's no catch, no touchdown.
The ground can...
I will admit it makes no sense, but by the rule and by what the officials are asked to do, they got that call correct.
The ground can't cause a fumble, but it can cause an incompletion.
Yes.
All right. Have you ever seen an index card pulled out to get a first down?
I have not. Probably shouldn't have done that, but
the NFL said it was okay.
Yeah. Well, I think
the NFL said the ref's use of the index card was within the rules.
Yeah. Well, the NFL says a lot of things. But think about this. I'm driving to MetLife Stadium yesterday, and a English woman or Australian, I forget what Siri is telling me exactly where to go at all times. At all times. And we have this GPS technology. I think the goofiest thing in sports, and I think it's a tie between baseball and football. Baseball, the strike zone, which is so dramatically bad from umpire to umpire, and football with spots, which are so dramatically bad. You should be able to use GPS technology to know where that football is.
Chipping the ball.
Take advantage of the technology. Exactly. But they won't do it, and I don't understand it.
All right, John, that's all the time we have for today. I enjoyed it.
All right, thank you, guys.